Cool. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the first ever Ent community webinar. It's a first of its kind gathering for our community to meet like in a synchronous way. We're usually chatting on GitHub issues and Slack and Discord channels. So it's really fun to see so many familiar faces online at the same time. We prepared a cool presentation for you guys that we hope you'll find interesting. And I'll let Ariel begin.
Yeah, great. So, hi guys, I'm Ariel. Pleasure to see you all, and we hope to do it now like on monthly basis. Okay, this is where we can meet as a community, discuss, some ideas to hear what you guys do. At the end of the webinar, we will send you a form. If you can help us fill it and with some ideas, thoughts, and then what do you think, how do you think this webinar was, and some ideas for the next ones, things that you want us to discuss and maybe share. The structure of this webinar is like the first half hour will be on some subject, what we call version migration in Ent, then some demo, and then we keep the second half to discuss about your questions, some ideas, some suggestions, and this is like open channel for the community where we can discuss, suggestion, proposal, and just improve the framework, basically. I will say that before Ariel, I used to do it a lot at Facebook internally. Okay, this is the chance I had, to meet more teams that using the framework, so gathering feedback from many other teams to hear about the different use cases. And this is what helped us to build fun framework to work with. And this is what we try to do now. Okay. And we didn't say that we said it's 5 or 10 people that will fill this. Five people that fill this form will get nice swag. Okay, t-shirt, stickers, and some other cool stuff. And version migration. This is really interesting subject. Let's go over it really quickly. Okay, so this is me. I'm the one who created this framework. Internally at Facebook, and then was in charge of open sourcing it. Was almost my personal effort. Doing database stuff for a lot of years, but mainly working on developer tooling. And really love the open source and the community. Find it really, really fun. Rotem, if you want to present yourselves.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Rotem. I'm Ariel's co-founder, helping out with Ent also, and a co-creator of Atlas, which is Ent's currently the migration engine. Before founding Ariel, I was architect at an Israeli company called Nexar, and before that, worked at Iron Source, the infrastructure group, where I met Ariel, and the rest of history.
Okay, so the agenda today is to discuss about the difference between declarative and version workflows. We'll also may hear your thoughts about it at the end. Then a different approach, like a mixed approach of the two workflow, what we call version migration authoring, and when to upgrade and why to upgrade, and then we'll do some live coding together, and then, like I mentioned, the rest is community chat. Okay, so declarative with version migration. So I don't know how many of you know what the declarative workflow means, but currently in Ent there's 2 ways. One of them is that you. Sorry. Okay, so in the declarative workflow, you define your end schema define the desired state. Okay, the current state is the state of the database that you are operating against. So currently, the process of declarative workflow is that you may be familiar with the schema create, where Ent using Atlas, inspect the database, building this schema graph of all the different constraints and relations between the tables, then compare it to what the end schema represent, generated diff, okay, basically a set of changes, how to bring the current state, the current database into the desired state. Then you can hook in and maybe change some of the logic there, and at the end you execute the operation. On the other end, we have version migration, which is you're familiar with most of the other tools. You have set of SQL files, okay, and they should be replayable in most cases. But like the left, replaying all migration files should represent the desired state. Okay, each file represents a point of time, a migration where you, like the version of the schema where you generate. And maybe just to emphasize, when you work with the declarative workflow, you usually work on a specific database. And when you work with version migration, you assume that there is some database on the other side. And when the execution happens, it may need to run some of the files or may not. So how the auto migration currently works, like I mentioned, we have the current state by inspecting the database. We have the desired state. Then we have some diffing mechanism that you can hook in. And this is where we can give developers the freedom to enable, maybe change some stuff that we are not supported at the moment. Okay, then we have the plan, where based on the changes, Atlas writing, the plan is just a set of SQL changes. And then we have the applying. How do you want to execute? You want to wrap it in transaction, you may want, and so on. And when to upgrade, I will let you, Rotem, to share your sense here.
Cool. So it used to be like up until version 10, 0.10 with Ant. This was the supported workflow. And if you wanted to use version migrations, if your team wanted to use this more classical approach of having a SQL scripts run in sequence and maybe use some of the more established tools like Flyway or Liquidbase and Golang Migrate in the Go community, then you kind of had to. There were some stuff in Ant that you could hook into and get it to plan, print out the SQL that it's going to run, but it wasn't kind of really endemic to the architecture and to the stuff that Ant supported out of the box. And many teams approached us with saying that they want support for this. And actually, it's a good question. Why would a team want something that is kind of more manual, more explicit, when you have this almost magical experience of just declaring what you want and letting the engine figure out what needs to be done? And the reasons that we found that teams like this version migration approach is that one, it's predictable. It doesn't depend on the specific state of a specific database. It's especially important if you have either a multi-tenant system with many databases running the same application. Each of them might be in a different version, or if you don't know where your application is running, right? You're a vendor, and you have many installations that you don't necessarily manage. So it's very convenient to know exactly the SQL statements that are going to be run. Some teams have a very strong proficiency in SQL. They want to make some optimizations into how exactly they want SQL to run, and so they like this approach where these scripts are put into source control and they're reviewed in code review, and everything is great. The second reason we're seeing is the point of review, right? You touched this at the end of the live demo. There's a lot of dangers related to making changes to a database. So a lot of teams really want to know exactly what's going to happen and to actually approve it against some policies or some human review to think out what's going to be the impact on the system of these changes, right? With database DDL statements, we have the power to delete everything, basically, right? We can lock the database to a point where it's not going to be not responsive for a while, right? So teams want this extra set of eyes to know during code review what's going to happen when we release a version. And I mentioned this before, but more control, right? There's the famous question of how to add an index concurrently, right? Depending on your circumstances, you may want to add the index concurrently or not, right? And teams that have an easy database with a complex schema have a lot of considerations, and they just want to be able to take these scripts and customize them to the point that they want.
Yeah, like one thing to emphasize is that in the declarative workflow, you define what the state you want to have in the database. And using the version workflow, this is where you can control how you want to get to this desired state. So adding an index, okay, is something that happens because you want to have it in your desired state. But if you work with the declarative workflow, you may write some hook that and add some annotation that say, please add this concurrently. But if you have something like this if you use the version workflow, you can define a policy that it must reside on the SQL file.
So to sum up, in our experience, when you're starting out with Ant, you're probably using the declarative auto-migrate, the auto-migrate option, just because it's easy to set up. But at some point, the complexity of your application, either operationally or your requirements from your database, are going to you're going to need some more control and more visibility into what's going on. And so we still recommend, if you're just hacking something together, prototyping something, sure, keep using auto-migrate. But we're seeing that as applications mature, there comes a point where you really want more control, and that's what this guide today is for.
Okay, let's continue. Okay, so version migration authoring. Okay, it's not that updated. Maybe. Okay, we'll go over it really quickly because we are short in time. So version migration authoring, this is like the mixed approach between the fun of using declarative workflow. When you schema create all the resources, you don't need to run anything. Easy, super easy for testing. Only when you can run multiple tests in parallel. Okay, so in the version migration workflow, we have the migration directory, which represents the current state. Okay, this is a database that currently on the specific version may be, and we have the end schema which define the desired state. So using the version migration authoring, what we do, the end schema is normalized. Normalized, it means it goes through a dev database, and then we have the exact definition how it resides in a database, and it's stored aside what's called desired state. And then the migration directory is replayed on the on the same database that you can see in the tutorial, and then we use it as the current state. Then the diff mechanism happens between these two states, and then the output is a new migration file. Okay, so when you use a migration executor, maybe Atlas, maybe Go and Migrate, or maybe other tool, the migration executor will check against the migration table in the database on what version the database is currently reside, and then replay the rest of the migration that need to be executed. Okay, so some databases reside will be in different versions. Okay, and this is how you promise some predictability that these are the set of changes. I know that I replay them on my CI. It's going to work on production as well.
Cool. Is this the last slide? Yeah.
And there's a question. So the dev database. What's the question? Maybe you can answer it really quickly. So that database will be some kind of simulated virtual database, not a persistent. Right. So you will see it in the example. The database is just a way that, it's a connection thing you give. It can be a Docker container. It can be something that, you may have something in the cloud that you can fill with some data if you want. Okay, and this is just a temporary way to, run the changes on a database, make sure that actually, database at the end is, it's everything. It's like a machine that it's a compiler, it's a parser, it's some virtual machine that can execute functions. Okay, it's a complete world, and we cannot simulate all of this based on the different dialects and different versions internally in Ant. And this is why we use this dev database. Is also usually recommended to use the exact version that you use in production. Make sense? Okay, great.
Cool. So now we're going for everyone's favorite part, which is live coding. All right. So to show this, we just recently added a new tutorial to the Ant website, which really goes in depth into how to upgrade from an auto-migrate based project to version migrations. Okay, so I'm going to share this in email, and you can just find it on the Ant website. If you want to take your Ant project and move to version migration with Atlas, this is the guide for you. And we're just going to go do a quick live run through it. And if you have some questions, write it in the chat, and we're happy to answer. Well, okay, so for this application, for this demo, right? We have a very simple Ant application with some blog, right? We have the user schema with some name and email, and we have a blog post, okay? And our application currently is very similar. It's very simple. It just does some seeding, and in the end, it prints out whatever is needed. Okay, so what we're going to do for the purpose of this demo, we're going to assume that we have a Docker image running locally, right? And that's going to be our production database, right? And we're going to have two. I'll just show this. We're going to have load for a second. So we have two schemas basically in this local image. One is going to be called DB, which will represent the production environment, and the other one will be called Dev, which is going to use it as a Dev database that Atlas and Ant can use to plan migrations. Okay, so just let's make sure that we have our DB database, and we should already have the Dev database already exists. So great. Cool. So just to start out, just to make sure that we have this application and we have the schema we're simulating a situation where this application is live. It's been created. The past versions were created with auto migrate, and now we want to take this project and to move it into version migrations. Okay, so I'm just going to move this to the other window so it's easier for you guys to follow. And yeah, oh, it's going to be annoying. Okay. Cool. So the first thing we need to do is to enable version migrations. Okay, and we do this with a feature flag. Okay, because version migrations are currently enabled only by feature flag. Okay, so we go to our NC script. Okay, if you're not familiar about this, we can put a note in the right.
So the NC file is just a way to run Ant as a Go program. Okay, you may want to configure it differently, add some custom code for attaching, some codegen hooks. Okay, if you didn't follow what we do now, is just showing an example how to migrate a production database that use automatic migration to version migration.
Yeah.
Okay.
So first thing we did was enable the feature flag for version migration. We're going to rerun codegen, right? Go generate. And what we're going to see is a small modification. Right, you can see the new lines that added some capabilities that are needed for working with version migrations. Okay, after we enabled the feature flag, the next thing we want to do is we want to create the script that will do the version migration authoring for us. Okay, so we have this example script here for us. Okay, and we're going to go and create it in the migrate package. Okay, and we can go over what this script does in a bit. Okay, so what it does, first of all, it creates the migrations directory where the migration files are going to reside. It instantiates basically the Atlas directory, right? And we need to provide it a name, and we tell it to create a named diff. Okay, a named diff basically means it's a version that has a name. Okay, so once we have this, we are ready. We can now plan our. Yeah, we need to remove that from the tutorial. We can now plan our first migration. So if you look, I'm basically running this main file, this a version migration authoring script. I'm giving it the name initial. So the created schema should represent the schema at the point where that our application is in. Okay, we see this ran successfully, and now we can find in the migration directory this SQL file that is creating the users and the blogs tables, and this sum file. The sum file is a mechanism we use in Atlas to ensure linear history, right? It basically, you can read about it in the Atlas website, but what it's there for is we have a checksum of the entire migration directory and the sum for every file. And the situation that happens if two teams are working in parallel on the same file, it will cause a Git conflict that they need to resolve. So we ensure that the migrations land in a certain order, that we don't have anything unexpected in the project. Okay, so we successfully created this initial baseline migration, right? And now we want to, this is now supposed to be the state of our production database. And now we want to start managing the production database with this version migration flow. Okay, so our next step is to start to upgrade production. So the first thing is we want to do is to install Atlas. Okay, if you don't have it locally, it's available via brew install on Mac, and there's instructions for doing it on a Linux machine or Windows machine. Once Atlas is installed, okay, we can start doing the work. Okay, so like many other migration tools, okay, Atlas is also storing a metadata table in the target database that keeps track what migrations were applied on the specific database. Okay, so right now the database is not clean, right? It has the existing schema from our auto migrate flow, and so we should encounter some problem because the database is not clean. So let's see how this happens. Okay, so we run Atlas migrate apply. We tell where the migrations are and how to connect to the database. This is DB, our production database. Okay, and we see that we need to use either baseline or allow dirty. These are two options that can be used. Okay, we're going to use the baseline option. Okay, to baseline the database, it means that we tell it that we are starting history from this version. Okay, this version is already existing in the database. Okay, so what we're going to do You want to share something?
Yeah. So maybe like one question would be for some would be why. So if the database already exists, like running this version, why do we need this version and version history? Well, the first thing is needed because you want that the migration history, replaying the migration history, the migration directory should represent the desired schema. If this users and blocks table won't be there, we won't be able to calculate the desired schema. This is the first thing. Second part is because you may have multiple deployments. Okay, some of them will be new, some of them will be will have will run on a specific version, and this is why the baseline is needed.
Cool. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to run it, and we're going to provide the version number for this baseline version. We're going to provide it as the baseline command, baseline argument. And right now you see that Atlas finds that this is the last migration in the migration directory, and therefore no migration files need to be executed. We can verify the state of the database with the Atlas migrate status command. Okay, this kind of reads the migration metadata table on the target database and can show us what's going on. Okay, it's very useful for debugging, by the way, all sorts of troubleshooting situations. But we can see that the migration status is okay. We don't have any files to run, and we're doing well. Okay. Now, let's see the cool part for version migration authoring, which is saying we have an application. The data model evolves over time. Let's see how to add a new field. Okay, we want to add a new field to the end schema, and we also, when we had auto migrations, we would not need to think about adding the fields to the database. But in our situation, what we want to do is to generate the migration for us. Okay, so what we do, we're going to add this title field, and it's optional, and we're going to rerun. We're going to rerun CodeGen. Once we ran CodeGen, now we need to run the migration generation script. So we're adding the title and the title field. Okay, and now in the background, what's going on is that Ant and Atlas are connecting to the dev database. They are replaying all of the existing migrations in the migration directory. Once the dev database Okay.
Okay, now
and we're back. We're back.
try to open the air conditioner. Okay, great. Let's try to recap. Let's 3 minutes. Okay.
Okay, so basically we added a new field to our end schema. We regenerated the code. We reran the migration generation script. Okay, and now we expect that we have a new file, the add title field, and we see this simple alter table statement. So good job, Ant. You automatically calculate our migration file.
Yeah, so this is the same magic of the declarative workflow, that you don't need to write the SQL changes, just in most cases, but it's versioned. It's something that you can see, it's predictable, Okay, and now we can see what else you can do with it.
Cool. So
Let's go very quickly.
I think we can skip on this part. The next section in the tutorial show how to create a custom migration. Like if you want to do a seeding of data, you can create a Atlas migrate new to create a new migration file and to make that part of the deployment. What I want to show is a really cool feature that is used for verifying migration safety. So as we mentioned earlier, migrations is a very dangerous business, right? If you do the wrong thing, you can basically create damage to your production environment, either by locking a table, breaking your deployment sequence, losing data. Okay, and so one of the things we adding with Atlas is the ability to analyze the change before they happen and to integrate that with CI. So you can stop a build, you can stop a pull request from landing into your main branch if it contains something dangerous that you're not aware of. And I want to show a demo that I really like for this feature. So suppose we want to make the title script, the title field required now, right? We don't want it to be optional anymore, okay? Basically, we're changing the nullability property of this column in the database. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to go to the end schema. We're going to drop this. We're going to regenerate our code. We're going to make title required. Okay, so we're now planning another migration. Okay, and we see that it now calculates the migration to change it into not null. Does anybody know why this is dangerous or how this can break? It's a quiz. So let's see what. All right, thanks, Barnaby. Let's see what Atlas think about this idea. Okay, so Atlas has this command called linked, right? And it's kind of like a static code analysis for schema migrations. Okay, so we are going to pass it the dev URL. It needs the dev database to reply the file to check that they are okay, and then where the directory and what is the scope that we want to compare. Okay, in Git, it's really cool to do it based on comparing to your basically extracting the pull request context. But here we just want to look at the last migration file. Okay, so we let it run, and we see this comment. Line 2, modifying a nullable column title to non-nullable might fail in case it contains null values. Okay, now this would be really cool as a local development flow, right? You can integrate it into your loop. You're running it constantly, but it doesn't protect your team from these kind of mishaps that can happen. Okay, so what we have for this situation is that we can integrate it actually into CI. Okay, so we have wrapped Atlas in a GitHub action. Okay, and if we create a new workflow file, GitHub workflows Atlas CI. If we create this YAML file, okay, and you can see that what's going on here is that on pull request that change something in the migration directory, we are running this trigger, and we create a MySQL database, right? It's using the services option of GitHub Actions, so it's going to run in the background before our CI starts. It will start a MySQL container, and it basically uses the GitHub action. Okay, so let's see. By CI, we're now very hopeful that the demo gods are with us, right? It's generally supposed to fail now during a demo.
Well, yeah.
But
maybe show the result.
Yeah, what we can show is actually, we'll check in a minute if it works. But what you can see is that Atlas will print this report showing you this analysis and showing you that in this file you have this thing to look into, and clicking on the lint code, you can get more documentation on how to fix it. Okay, and just to see that Atlas really understands this thing, if we take this statement, right, if we do this backfill before the alter table, right, we do update users, and we fill everywhere that the title is null, we put the empty string.
Ah, shit. There you
go. Yeah, Atlas.
Hash.
Yeah.
Then run lint.
And we can run lint. And we can see that Atlas is happy, and it basically detects that there's no null values in the column.
Yeah,
and it can go.
Like, maybe something interesting to discuss, like on next webinar, if you want, is like how we implemented this lint logic and how it was inspired by the Go linting infrastructure, the analyzers package, if you're familiar with. Okay, let's recap and then start the open questions.
Cool. So just to recap, we showed how to upgrade a project from auto migrate to version migrations. We saw we need to enable the feature flag for version migrations. We showed the example script that automatically plans migrations for us for what we call version migration authoring. We show how to upgrade the production database to work with the Atlas metadata revision metadata table. We discussed briefly how to plan custom migrations that are not directly a result of changes to the end schema. And finally, we showed the CI capability, the linting capability of Atlas. And I really hope this is useful to you. And now it's time for questions and feedback and whatever.
So I do have a couple questions or thoughts, but not related to the version migration. So I just wanted to say I do have questions, but if someone else wants to go first with relation to the version migrations. No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, I just wanted to say that I've used End from the very first release, and I've used a bunch of other ORMs and tools related to database in Go, and I have to say that End absolutely just crushes all of them out there. I mean, there are a bunch of tools which I had to use, and it was a pain, and when we moved to End, it was like such a breeze and so easy. So thank you very much for building and open sourcing it. It really improved the database situation in the Go ecosystem. So thank you.
Thank you.
The question
before, so I actually know you. I know that you're behind X and actually know like some of the stuff you do.
Yeah. I know we talked back then. I remember. So I'm actually working on a project right now, and I wanted to just get your thoughts about the problem I'm dealing with. So the project itself is written in Java and Go, and they have to act on the same database. Don't ask why. It's just something we have to deal with. And they actually have to act on the same tables. And it's kind of hard to share the schema between them and to make sure that the migrations, so both ORMs, I don't know what's used in Java, I use anything Go, but both of them do these kind of auto migration, and the schema regularly gets out of sync. So when one is deployed, it changes something in the schema, and when the other is deployed, it changes something else. So right now we're trying to kind of consolidate into one solution, and we are not really ready to go to version migrations just yet. I absolutely agree that for mature production systems should use most of the time probably version migrations. And I've looked at Atlas as kind of a middle ground or schema that we could use to manage migrations. But I don't really see how it could be integrated into either Go or Java. I mean, I know that under the hood End uses Atlas, But if we start writing like the schema in Atlas, and how can we integrate it into Go? And I guess taking one step back, trying to generalize the problem, how would you approach this kind of situation where you had to deal with two separate applications working on the same schema, either with Ant or Atlas or something like that?
Yeah, so I will try to tackle it a bit differently, and I can share with you what we want to add really soon. So the first thing is that as I see it, I will so if you have two different ORMs that are trying to update the schema, I will just decide who will be the owner of the schema. In my opinion, should be only one owner. And in this case, I will suggest that Atlas will be the owner. But I still understand that they may be drift between the two different ORMs, right? You have something in Ant and you have something in Java, but you want to make sure that there's no drift between them, so they represent the same schema. So actually, Rotem started to work on some integration, to other frameworks like Gorm and other ORMs. And what so at the moment, the process is just what we do is using Atlas, you can maintain migration directory without managing the schema in Atlas. So you use migrate diff, but you have two states: the current state, what we call the from, and then the to state, and the desired state, what we call to. So we have from to. So the from can be one database, and the to can be other database. And what we do now, so for example, the Gorm integration that Rotem created is basically running Gorm using its auto migrate, and then this is the desired state, and then the current state is just the migration directory that currently maybe be empty, and then we run migrate diff to bring the migration directory through to the Gorm desired state. And this is how you can use, without rewriting your whole Gorm application. You just need to do this binding, and then, sorry, there's some noise here. And then Atlas generated diff for you, and from this moment you can run migrate apply to execute the migration, and you know that the migration that Atlas applied and maintained is the same one that was expected by Gorm. Now, what I will suggest to create two different scripts, one to Ant, the second one for your, let's say, like Hibernate or something else that you use in Java, and just to make sure there's no drift there. So running the first time on Ant, running it again on Java should not generate additional SQL files. What we plan to do really, really soon is to add to add integration to Atlas called schema loaders. It's just a way to define, same as you can say now MySQL :/ and then you inspect MySQL to have something like Ant, SQLize, TypeORM, Gorm, Hibernate. So many different data load schema loaders that actually will go through the same process. Will use a temporary database, will create the desired schema, and then Atlas will read it from there. And because this is the database, okay, that this is, if we don't do any, language parsing and some evaluation, that this will be the exact definition that the database expects. So I hope this is answer your question. We can actually support you on Discord if you want to make it happen now, but just to make sure it works for you now. But in the future, not that far from now, we already discussed a lot about these schema loaders, which should be much more nicer. You have this definition, one HCL definition, the configuration for Atlas, and then it knows how to traverse the different directories, and you can use Atlas to maintain multiple projects, but you have one executed that do everything: limping, do diffing, do applying. Okay, and sometimes actually you have one migration directory that actually depends on other migration directory now, because all the microservices.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm gonna take a look at the diff that you suggested, and then reach out to you on Discord if
of course.
I need any help.
I'm available on Discord for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, thank you for the ping on Discord for the webinar. I actually didn't know it's going to happen, and I joined last minute from my phone while I was going home. So
Yeah, this is actually the first, like, I'm not like a social network person. I'm really active on Discord, but I'm not a person that does webinar stuff like that. But Rotem convinced me and say, okay, let's give it a try.
absolutely, it is a great idea. So I do have another question, but I can see someone having their hands up. So
I see
we're gonna-
that Barnaby Keane, you have a question?
I had a question around migrations for, well, migrating a project that already exists, right? So say a database that has like 2 or 3 years of migration history. Quite a large schema. I recently just did that for a couple of products I work on, and it was a very long process of writing an Ent schema that matched what we had for like turning on Ent. I used Ent import to bootstrap it, but what Ent import generated wasn't
perfect.
Yeah, it wasn't
it wasn't
perfect.
perfect, yeah. So I was wondering if you had any plans to sort of like bring that in as like an official part of Ent to like improve the developer experience, like adoption into like an existing database, an existing product, existing code base, because it seems that project is just in the contrib directory at the moment. And I ran into some issues, but it seems that like it's just kind of what seems like a side project. It's not really maintained because I found a few issues, but then they weren't resolved. And I wanted to contribute, but I just didn't have time. So is there a plan to bring that on board as an official feature event?
That's actually a really good question, because I really want to add it to Ent. It's just a matter of priority, because at least as I see it, like we had a discussion for it, like we had some discussions on it a few times, and because we have, like sometimes also like just opens for priorities, because what is critical for users and what's not. And I think it went this way. We have these cogent features which just make life easier to work with, and like, for example, like cogent hooks integrated with GraphQL. So these are the features that just integrate and integrate your existing frameworks and other tools. So this is really nice, and we think they're really in the top priority. And then we have the runtime feature, which is optimizing queries, adding more capabilities, and so on. And then there's starting in Ent, and one of it is Ent import. And I definitely agree, it's not perfect, and it almost need to be rewritten. And we discussed, like Jao and I discussed it a few times, like in the last month, and it's currently paying to do it. But in terms of priority, I think for users that at the moment want to do this, they may need to spend more time to create to work on creating the first Ent schema. But this will be like one-time thing. From this on, they will have better experience. So this is why it was last in the priority, but doesn't mean we don't want to support it or to make the experience better.
I want to add something to the question of priorities. So we founded this company. Again, we're maintaining Ent and Atlas and a bunch of the extensions around it. We raised 2 rounds of funding in the seed and a round A, and we wrote this on Discord. We're not pushing it very hard, but maybe today is a good stage to say this, that we're hiring for a bunch of roles. If you want to work on Ent full time, to write content, to contribute to the framework, we hope that our next few employees are with us today on this call, because we had an amazing experience, and I think Jao and Yannick can share that it's really fun to work with us. And so we've hired people from this community, and it's just a matter of bandwidth. I mean, Ent import really deserves a lot more attention, and I think that early next year we can put like a sprint or two to to improve it because it's very useful for onboarding people to the framework. Or in situations when you need to sync with like a really brownfield project. So
and I will say that Ant is really like open source thing, like it's a Linux Foundation thing, and like even when I was working at Facebook, no one actually paid you money to do maintain open source. It's like full commitment of your free time, and it's something that you get into it, and it's really hard to like to go out, and I really enjoy that. And but like Rotem mentioned, people that work with us, we give them time to work on the framework. And also something to mention, as the same pattern that I used at Facebook, we use here internally. We usually develop stuff, see that they work locally for us, sometimes not production, and then we open source them. The GraphQL integration was running at Facebook for almost a year. Okay, this is really because I didn't open source it, because some of the hypotheses that I have about data loaders are not needed, and different stories there. We want to make sure that they're working good before we open source them. So sometimes critical stuff takes time, and just apologize for that. But we continue to develop the framework.
So I have a quick question. So first, I wanted to say thanks for creating such a great product. It's really a pleasure. Like it's a joy since we've switched to Ant. All the database stuff is not a problem anymore.
Thank you. Really great.
I mean that. I do have a question. Since it's so easy to create joins and to create, traversals, or kind of graph traversals using Ant, sometimes the queries, the generated queries are kind of complex, and sometimes you end up in subqueries, scanning the whole table, and it's hard to actually figure out which part of the code that we write turns into these table scans. So do you have any experience or anything you can share about how to optimize queries? It's like I look into the query inspector on GCP, and it throws a gigantic. I know that this is maybe anti-pattern. It's my own fault for writing these kinds of queries, but maybe you have some insight.
Well, that's a good question, to be honest. I will say that we discussed it, Rotem and I, a few times, that we want at some point to create some integration to Ant, like in CI, so we'll be able to run your queries and then give you suggestions about possible patterns that you may better to use, or maybe indexes that you can add or drop, because depends if your query is actually like updated. But there are so many other companies and tools that providing these services that maybe we can integrate with them. So I will say that I don't have a good answer for that. Usually when you have slowness in your application, in your database, we just GCP as some tracing, really good tracing integration. So at Facebook, we used to go back and check exactly which reserve are generating these bad queries. But regular traversal usually okay. So again, I don't have good answer for that. Besides, just in case when you have bottlenecks, you just need to stop, figure out where exactly it comes from, and then so if you work with GCP, so the SQL common feature that we added to like you can see it like in Ariga, it's just a wrapper driver for Ant that you can attach this tracing comment, and then you can see exactly from which resolver or like HTTP request it came from. It can help you.
Yeah, that's good. I didn't know that. That I can find that in the Ant docs.
You can.
There's a blog post on it.
There's a blog post on it, and of course, and maybe if you have specific use cases that you can share with us, like one use case that I found, for example, from our code base, is that and usually for update operation, always using transactions. So what we found for one statement, databases usually just wrap it in like it's a single statement. Like transaction is not needed. Just add some two statements over it for starting a transaction and committing it. So this is some optimization that we added. We just dropped this wrapping in case if you have only one statement update. So again, if you have specific use case, you may can help us to improve the framework.
Okay. Yeah, I can't do that right now, but yeah.
Cool. I saw a short question on down migrations, and I think we'll wrap up with that one. So Boomzik Kim, you're asking, does Atlas support down migrations? It's very common in ORMs like Rails or Golang Migrate. We thought about this one really hard, and we have a kind of a maybe unpopular opinion on this, but we really stick to it, that in practice, down migrations are kind of not a real thing, right? You write them, you plan them. When you're really in trouble, it's not really what you usually will do, right? And our approach is, instead of rolling back, is to roll forward, right? Atlas has a very strong diffing engine, which enables the declarative migration workflow. And we say, if you want to go to a version back, you can just plan a diff to go to that state, right? So that's kind of in a nutshell. It's much more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, that's our idea. You're supposed to roll forward by using and Yannick is here. Yannick wrote a very comprehensive guide on troubleshooting migrations. I think we should do a webinar just on that.
I agree. I will add to that in most cases, when you have failures in migration on a specific database in production, okay, so in this case, what I believe is you should troubleshoot and fix this, and not like down sometimes just can drop data, okay. And this is why we kind of against it and recommend differently. Of course, like Atlas can generate for you if you work with Golang Migrate. What we found that in most cases failures happen because the change is data dependent. It means it passed on the database in CI, but then it fell on the production database because there's data constraint. And now how we can prevent this stuff that we want to add to Atlas really soon. It's something that we started to discuss two months ago. We're in the design process and working on some experiments. The first thing is to do a snapshot-based simulation. Take a snapshot of the database on, let's say, on the specific cloud. Of course, this is only if your changes contain data-dependent changes. And then run the operation on a snapshot database, make sure it passed, and then continue to the database. And then in case of failures, also provide a better approach, something called migrate fix. Atlas is a much smarter tool than other migration executor. You can inspect, can do some diffing, and do some planning, can generate for you stuff that will help you to troubleshoot failures in a much better way. So yeah, and maybe just to share another cool thing is like the drift detection, because we know what the migration directory describe, and Atlas has this inspection mechanism that you can get the graph, this schema graph of the database. Look, we can find if we have some drifts between the database, someone connect to it, change the schema, and this may cause the migration execution to fail. You may want to set policy that Atlas should fail and not execute any version, because the database was changed not by Atlas, by someone that I don't know. Okay, so these are some of the safety that may reduce the failures almost to zero. Okay, at least this is the experience I come from different companies that I was operating on, and in many cases, at least and when I was working on the connectivity platform at Facebook, we had multiple deployments in so many data centers that we didn't add access to them. So there was some operator on the other side that need to troubleshoot failures, okay, because regulation, because business needs. So in this case, we want Atlas to be friendly for even non-technical users that need to troubleshoot failures. Okay, something that will support you in crisis. Okay, to give you the same experience of Ant. And I will say, you want to say something before I recap?
On the feedback form.
Yeah.
Cool. So as we said in the beginning of the call, I'm now sending out a link to a feedback form. And we will really, really love to hear your thoughts about how we did on this call and what you would like to see in the future. And as Ariel said, we're going to do a raffle, right? And 5 out of the responders that went on this webinar will send you some really cool swag.
Yeah, and Mark, I just want to answer your question. So for something I started thinking of in the last few days, specifically for development, I want to provide this experience just to make it easy to down the less changes or something. So for local development, we're going to support something like this. And yeah, so like what I mentioned, Rafael and Pedro, we're going to, if you're still here, we are going to send you another cool gift from us because you are one of the community hero that we have. Well done, Pedro. And yeah, so please share with us some ideas for the next webinar. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you.